Welcome to Grade 7, Quarter 3 Professional Development for Texas History. Here you can open your participant guide. There is a bit.ly as well as a QR code. Take a moment here to open your participant guide, which has many of the links that you will need throughout the training. Meet the Social Studies Department Small but Mighty Team. Dr. Hill, Shalon Bond, Athena Newton, Irene Lyons, Cicely Williams, our mighty assistant Martha Castillo, myself Shirley Steele, and Graham Stevens. These are the Social Studies Instructional Lead Coaches district-wide. Sabrina Green is in Region 1. Bilal Khalid is in Region 4. James Hutchison is Region 2. These are our norms and community agreements. Take care of yourself and your needs, be fully present, be vulnerable, be mindful of other learners, and assume a positive attitude and intent. Since this is a webinar, at times I will say just go ahead and pause and work on something, and feel free to pause, of course, at any time that you need to in order to work through what you need to understand. Here is our agenda. We will talk about historian or influencer, practice makes perfect, and implementing the practice in the toolkit, the historian's toolkit. Our core values are effective instruction. Our Tier 1 instruction will yield on or above grade level achievement. Equitable access and outcomes. All at-risk students will succeed with equitable access and opportunity. And excellence. We are committed to continually pursuing excellence. Our Social Studies Department vision is that all Dallas ISD students think critically, engage civically, and connect globally. Our mission is providing intentional support and growth opportunities in social studies. The Social Studies Department philosophy. Social studies is vital for students to understand who they are and how to best navigate their lives by making decisions as confident, knowledgeable, civically engaged members of society. Take a moment here to see what resonates with you. You may pause the webinar as you think on the philosophy. Why are we here in this training? Why are we here as teachers? Our job as educators is to inspire and excite our students. So we are responsible for educating and creating responsible citizens. Think about what this question means to you. So why are we here? Let's answer the how. By teaching students to think like a historian. So how can primary sources help us know the truth? Why primary sources, visuals, and artifacts? Because they were created at the time of a historical event to get an idea of what historical actors thought about the events that they were living through. A current focus on disciplinary literacy has brought primary sources back to the forefront, and they respond to the mistaken belief that by using primary sources you can avoid controversy and bias. Learning objective. I am applying HIPPO, OPTIC, and 4QM strategies to equip students with the vital tools to think as historians. Success criteria is I can explain why we are teaching social studies. I can use HIPPO, OPTIC, and 4QM with district-provided resources. And I can implement HIPPO, OPTIC, and the 4-question method 4QM during quarter 3 to ensure students can think like a historian. Learning objective. I am applying Hippo Optic and 4QM to equip students with the vital tools to think as historians. Which graphic is more fact or more fiction at the time? You will be comparing and discussing, and I will give you some time in a moment so that you can pause to compare the two graphics. And as you're looking at them, ask yourself, why is it important to know the complete and accurate story, and how do both of these contribute to historical context also? Take a few minutes to compare them and try to decide which one is more fact and which one is more fiction. Now that you've had time to compare them, I will give you a little bit of background on each one of them. Graphic A is from 1864, and it depicts the Republican ball with African American women dancing with Republican white men. This was engineered on the assumption that though Northern voters may be against slavery, they would recoil at the notion of unrestricted race integration. The original ran in a newspaper and said this was the actual Republican ball, which was completely a false statement. Graphic B is Thomas Nast' 1865 emancipation picture in an optimistic view of emancipation on the right and depicts slavery in the South on the left. So as you may have noticed on the previous documents, one was meant to influence and one was, they were both meant to influence, but one was more factual than the other one. One was a complete falsity. It was made to deceive people and to influence people, but both are historical documents. So when we're looking at the difference between historian and influencer, even though one of them was definitely meant to influence and the other document, the one from Nast, was meant to influence, what would be the differences between historian or influencer? Take a moment to think about that, and you may pause the video here and jot down a few ideas. Now that you've thought about some of your ideas, a historian, they analyze different sources. And yes, some of those sources can be from documents that were meant to mislead. Historian toolkits, they use those to gather information. Dallas ISD in social studies, we use 4QM, the 4-question method, Hippo, Optic, and also artifact analysis. Historians identify biases, point of view, and credibility versus an influencer. And not that influencing is a bad thing, because lots of documents are meant to influence for the good or the bad, but they all become historical documents in the end and can be used to really complete the entire picture of what the history that actually happened. They establish their own brand sometimes. They search for other brands and trends or create trends. They show social trends at the time, as that you could see in this in the historical documents you just looked at. And these days they use production equipment, camera, lighting, and fashion. Back in that time, they used these graphics these lithographs that they used to influence people. So with that said, think about for a moment, are both important to get a full picture of history. So I'm not saying that a historian versus an influencer is necessarily good or bad, because oftentimes the influencer really tells us more about the history going on and the different inputs that were going into the history at the time and the mindsets. So historian is get the facts versus selling a perspective. Success criteria. I can differentiate between a historian and an influencer. We are about to dive into quarter three content, and I will be modeling the hippo, the optic, and the four question method on different things. But I always like to start out with the TEAC 7.5a. That is the central role the expansion of slavery played in the involvement of Texas in the Civil War. Here are the overall numbers on it last year. You can see 7.5a. Could use a little bit of improvement. This is on the grade 7 second semester ACP data. Your data may be a bit different. And this is the honors data. Again, your data may be a little bit different. So this is definitely one that can be improved. In the following documents embedded within it, there are several TEACs embedded, but 7.5a is in these documents. Setting the stage. So if I wanted to, this would be a good hook using Octic. I am going to model two ways to use Octic. You may also use the specific questions NEQ that this is taken from. This is in the curriculum and on the landing pages in the curriculum. And this is two pictures of Texas. I will model the graphic A for you, and then using the Optic Visual Graphic Organizer, and then you can practice with graphic B and compare the two graphs. And you will do graphic B on your participant guide. I will go over the parts very quickly. First of all, there's the overview. That's the O. That's what is the picture all about. The parts, those are your detailed parts of the pictures. The title and text, that's your, if it has a title, any text that would give you clues would be notated in this box. The interrelationship of the different components within the picture, as well as the outside information that may already be known, and also the conclusion, which wraps up what you think the message was and what the point was of the whole graphic in the first place based on the evidence you find and citing in the conclusion and from the graphic. So I usually start not with the O, but I start with the title and text first. And the title and text, I started out with that one. And if you notice over there, I highlighted the slaves as a percentage of the total population and also the slave population in Texas. That's very important title and text. Notating around there that the Gulf of Mexico is there, Mexico is there, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Arkansas. Some of that could also be part of the parts. That's the next thing I noticed. And that this is the, I wrote on here that I noticed that the different parts, the lowest percentage is in South Texas. That's where the blue arrow is as far as slave population. And also as you go further west in Texas. And the western or the eastern parts of the state in east of the blue line is where the highest percent of slave population was in Texas. And I also note on here that the little pieces represent counties and that each county has a courthouse, which means it had a setup, the government was set up. Anything past that point where it just says Texas in the white part, that just means that that area had not been settled by the United States yet. The Plains Indians were still out there, and that was their territory at this time. And so there's a lot, parts can be very detailed, but they're very important. Also, you could even take into account the scale down there. That could also be part of title and text. Then the overview, it shows the slave population in 1860. Basically, this is a graphic about the slave population in Texas in 1860, and 1860 is important because that's a year before the Civil War. Interrelationships. Um, Texas doesn't have counties to the west. I've already mentioned that because that's where the Plains Indians were located, and the settlements hadn't gone that far west. And then the eastern counties have higher slave populations and depend more on slavery as because of the percentage of population. And in conclusion, I can infer and conclude that the eastern counties uh, would be more protective of slavery if they thought slavery was threatened in any way, because that's how they made their money, basically. So I have done that one for you, and now it is time to pause the webinar and do the same for graphic B. But as you do them, being the advanced students that you are, you can also compare A and B as you analyze graphic B using Optic. You may pause here as you work on analyzing graphic B using Optic. And here is graphic B, secession vote 1861. Now that you're finished using Optic to analyze graphic B and also in your conclusion comparing the two, I'm sure that you probably came up with in your conclusion and the interrelationships that the slave population and the way people voted for secession in Texas were highly correlated. Most counties, by popular sovereignty, most people back then voted to secede from the Union, and that correlates highly, you may notice, with slave ownership. Now we are going to look over the HIPPO document analysis, and HIPPO stands for Historical Context, Intended Audience, Point of View, Purpose of the Document, and Outside Information. If you notice, there's some stems to help students write or get started, but then the questions are over there to the far right. And these are the questions that students should be asking themselves as they read through the document. What we hope to do by using these strategies and analysis and making it very systematically is embedding this type of critical thinking into students' thinking so that as they read documents or historical documents, they automatically begin to apply the questions and question the documents through this lens. That is our end goal. So the questions are: what was going on at this time in historical context? How does this help you understand the document? The intended audience is: what was the document written for? The point of view has to do with the author. What was the author's point of view or intention in writing this? There's several questions there, and sometimes this could include knowing more about the author, so you may have to actually research. It also includes point of view, can be inferred by the way they use language sometimes. And then the purpose of the document is: what was the author's purpose when in writing the document? Was it informational? Was it a letter? Was those type of things. And then outside information, what specific outside information does this connect to, or into the bigger picture of things? And this can go into background knowledge as well, using background knowledge. This is also true of historical context. Now, as I said, I am going to be doing a lot of modeling because the how. I mean, how do you actually use these strategies? So this is a shorter version. I just did this document so that I could analyze. This is in the curriculum, the Civil War, Why Did Texans Fight? This is in the mini-Q. You'll see that in weeks 1 and 2 of quarter 3 for 7th grade. And this is one of the documents that really has some really good background information in it. And I'm going to use this to model how to use Hippo. First of all, take a moment to read the document. You may pause and read through the document at this time, and pause here. Now that you've read through the document, I'm going to go ahead and model how I would take a look at this. This is the historical context, what was going on then, and it tells you in that first paragraph, and you can read that there, what was going on in the historical context. You may pause it a moment to read that. And then the intended audience. You may pause it a moment to read that. And then the author's point of view, I found that towards the bottom. This is more an informational text because it is background information and taken from a lot of different documents, but you can use Hippo. It's great for primary sources, but you can also use it on secondary sources. And the purpose of the document, this was written to give history on how the U.S. started splitting apart. And as you notice over there in the green, I have circled where I found that evidence. And this is a really good strategy to have students underline or circle or square different information so that they can put the evidence into and really analyze that document. And the last one is outside information. I tied this back to some information that I already knew, and it reminded me of, made me wonder about Houston, like when he fought, and hopefully students will go here too. Houston felt like, I kind of got the feeling he thought he could beat Santa Anna by wearing him out with him chasing him when we were studying previously about Sam Houston, but he was not willing to go to task with the United States and didn't feel like he could win against them. So that was something that outside information that I connected there. Now, as a way to scaffold and use specific questions, there are questions built into the mini-Q in the curriculum, and I will model how I answered using evidence from the text. You can use those too. How did the Missouri Compromise limit the growth of slavery? The compromise said that the future slave states would not be permitted in any new territories north of 3630 latitude, and that was in 1820. And then how did Sam Houston's opinions compare with those of most Texans on the Kansas-Nebraska Act and secession? Well, we know even from the maps we studied previously, right, that Sam Houston was not in agreement with most voters in Texas. And he felt like the Missouri Compromise should stay in place and that slavery should not be allowed to be expanded. He didn't agree with most Texans. And it says it clearly there in the text. And then the next one is, what event in 1859 increased tension between the North and the South? And that was John Brown's raid to free slaves at Harper's Ferry in Virginia. And though that did not happen in Texas, those are the things leading up that Texans heard about. And those are things that were going on that led up, that will answer our questions on why did Texans fight. So how many southern states seceded before Texas? 6. It says that they're in the text that we were the 7th, so that one's pretty straightforward. And then what evidence shows how strongly Governor Sam Houston was against slavery? Now I'm going to model the 4-question method. And the 4 questions is what happened, what were they thinking, why then and there, and what do I think about that? These 4 questions, as you're studying something, students can ask these, or you can ask students this, or use this to just really spiral that information. The first one, the what happened, is more about the narration. The second one, what were they thinking? That one is about the interpretation. Really great for primary sources and primary source excerpts, that question 2. The why then and there, that has to do with context. And the last one is what do I think about that? And that has to do with judgment. Like once they have studied and looked at different sources and done different readings and had time to really analyze a situation and documents and a topic, then what did they really think about that? And that's really tying all those connections together. So I will model this for you. What happened after many compromises, Texas decided to exit the United States and join the Confederate States of America. So what were they thinking? Just using this source, they were thinking they wanted to protect slavery and that they could beat the northern states in a war. We can see that from Sam Houston. He thought the opposite, and everybody else obviously voted the other way. And then why then and there? Well, the Missouri Compromise had been undone and slavery could not expand to new territories. I'm sorry, and could expand to new territories. It sounds like they started seceding right after Lincoln was elected president. I think that is very important because that's when it seems like it all fell apart. And they felt like if new states if they had no chance of being able to vote and keep an equal number of votes in the Congress, then eventually Congress would be able to outlaw slavery. I know that's a lot of inference, but based on some of the information and based on this background reading, that is something that I put on there as an inference. And what do I think about that? I put on here, I think slavery is morally wrong, and the moral code of the time must have been quite different than today. I have a difficult time justifying expanding slavery in any way. I also wonder and start making connections. I also wonder if Compromise of 1850 and the Mexican Cession gave more land that would later become states and have to decide whether to be free or slave states. This caused a lot of conflict in trying to protect a way of life that obviously was people were against and was going away. Now, don't worry, this is a webinar and you will have time to go back and you can look back on the webinar and you have time to go into the curriculum at the end and be able to do this yourself and practice and apply these yourself. And you can go back and look at the webinar to see how to do it. Now, I will highlight question 2 of the 4-question methods. And what I wanted to model for you here is how to use that what were they thinking, where to use that. You will find that the what were they thinking question lends itself to primary source excerpts and analysis. So using the documents that we have so far in answering the question, why did Texans fight in the Civil War? I will model question 2 as it relates to primary source excerpts on the right. So what were they thinking? The excerpts tell us a lot about what different folks in the nation were thinking at the time. The first excerpt is saying the U.S. is of equal state. U.S. is equal to states, and that a state may stay or leave the United States as it wants. The second box, the speaker clearly was saying that states had more power individually and the national government didn't have power without states. and then we are rather individual states instead of one nation. The third box is from Abraham Lincoln, and he says it's unlawful to secede or get out of the Union. He says the Union in the United States, or the United States, is perpetual, and if there is unlawfulness, there is punishment. It sounds like that means war. Since I'm interpreting, I can also infer and refer to previous learned materials. They all thought slavery would be abolished in the South, so they were protecting what interested them, and thought states' rights were over national rights, and they could leave and decide to keep slavery. I really think that's what it was all about. Now it's your turn. Use sources in the curriculum to answer the following question using your history toolkit. Civil War, why did Texans fight? So now see if there's other places in the curriculum where you can answer the question using that question, why did Texans fight, or causes of the Civil War in that first week. If you can find places where you can apply and use HIPPO in your lessons, OPTIC in your lessons, or the 4 questions. You may pause the webinar here. Now let's look at some next steps. How can I use the HIPPO, OPTIC, and 4 question method in my lessons, and where are some opportunities in quarter 3? You're going to have time to do that, where I can use the 4 question methods, OPTIC, or HIPPO, or all 3. Take some time to explore how you can implement 4 question method 4QM, HIPPO, or OPTIC into your upcoming lessons. You may use the participant guide to record your opportunities. And here are some of the topics to implement the Thinking Like a Historian toolkit that we've been discussing in quarter 3 lessons, to give you ideas and to find resources and to use resources using the 3 strategies talked about. So, success criteria. I can implement HIPPO, I can implement OPTIC, and I can implement 4QM during quarter 3 to ensure mastery. Now that you've finished looking over your quarter 3 resources and finding opportunities to use the Historian's Toolkit, your success criteria is I can use HIPPO, OPTIC, and 4QM with district provided resources. And before we leave, let's go over the tiered curricular resources. You can find Tier 1 resources on the landing page on the curriculum, in the curriculum. And then curriculum framework for Tier 2 and 3 resources. Those are recommended to provide targeted skills and support for small groups of students who are not successful with Tier 1. And then also supplemental digital tools that are especially and have a plethora of supplemental digital tools or Elevation, and that can be accessed through Clever. This is great for English language learners, but these engagement strategies and instructional tools, are really great for everyone. Social Studies tiered curricular resources. For the content, of course, you go to the landing page for Social Studies, and then for Tier 1, that will be Social Studies Weekly or resources, HMH or Holt McDougall Online and McGraw-Hill. Tier 2 resources are Active Classroom, as well as Discovery Education, and they also have Tier 3 resources, which are in Active Classroom and Discovery Education.